Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Dominic Frisby. Dominic, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Max. Lovely to be here.
I want to just point out that you are the resident gold bug at Money Week,
That's
a
right.
fine publication here in the UK. You're also the author of the crowd-funded Life After the State.
Yes, absolutely right, and it's coming out in about a month's time.
Oh, so. Fantastic. All right, Dominic Frisby, let's talk about the UK economy. GDP is up. Is it up for the wrong reasons, however, as some are suggesting, like just tied to housing? Your thoughts?
Well, the housing market is enjoying a rally, and our economy is too dependent on housing and finance. This recovery is fueled by debt and money printing and so on and so forth. The bottom line is we don't make enough stuff. I think something like 10% of our industry, 10% of our GDP is manufacturing. Once upon a time, it was over 50%.
Right. So prior to the 2007 and 2008 crash, the UK economy was over-reliant on finance and housing. So after the crash, George Osborne decided to reinflate the housing and finance bubble.
I think that's about right, yeah.
So the GDP numbers reflect a new bubble.
I would say so, and but when it pops is the big question. If it will ever pop, who knows? Okay,
so we're saying 10% or less of the economy is actually export-driven.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's all speculative excess, again, driven by a Ponzi scheme. George Osborne's Help to Buy scheme, which is a part of his housing scheme. Everyone from the Keiser Report here to Mervyn King to the IMF has called Mervyn King's scheme a Ponzi scheme. Now, the participants in the scheme love it. But your thoughts?
Well, I've yet to find somebody speak positively about it. It is met with only criticism, but I think I know what's behind it, because early in this government's term, I had quite a few meetings with policymakers, and people were there was this meme doing the rounds that what made Thatcher popular wasn't all the things that we read about. It was the fact there was a thing called right to buy, and it gave people who lived in council houses, in social housing, the right to buy their flats. And suddenly, this created a new kind of demographic, if you like, of homeowners. And it was this that made Thatcher popular amongst certain quarters of the working classes, and it was that made the Tories so popular. And what made the Tories unpopular and unelectable for maybe half a generation wasn't Tony Blair and what a wonderful guy he was. It was the fact that so many people lost their homes in the real estate crash of the late 80s, early 90s because of spiralling interest rates. People couldn't make their payments and homes were repossessed. So the Tories have got this idea that, one, we cannot let people lose their homes under our watch, which is one of the reasons you're seeing such suppressed interest rates. And two, they're trying to find a magic bullet, a bit like what right to buy was, and that's, I think, what's behind this Help to Buy. They're trying to turn people into homeowners. Another interesting factet for you is the fact that people who own their homes are more likely to vote than people who don't. So it's an entirely politically motivated policy, and it's not because they're so desperate to house people. If they were desperate to house people, they'd change all the crazy regulations about the housing market in this country. It's simply a vote-winning exercise, in my opinion.
Okay, so let's talk about the other side of these policies that are engineered to create a housing bubble, to create favorable voting conditions, low interest rates you mentioned already. But when you artificially come in and you supersede the market and you artificially press interest rates down using quantitative easing, for example, to boost your votes, as the Tories are obviously doing and trying to resurrect the ghost of Maggie Thatcher.
They're trying to engineer a boom in time for the next election.
But it causes some shortcomings in other areas of the economy. For example, savers, people who have money in the bank, who have saved, who have worked all their lives, instead of getting 5% interest on their savings as they would normally, they're getting 1% or 1.5%, right?
Absolutely. It creates a culture of spending and speculation rather than saving and investment.
So capitalism, and you're a capitalist.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But I'm, in the true sense of the word, I'm not a, whatever this is, I'm not a crony capitalist.
Fair enough. So capitalism relies on capital.
Absolutely. Capital
comes from savings.
Absolutely.
And savings comes from working.
Absolutely, and spending less than you earn.
So here you have an economy in the UK that's not capitalist in that sense. So when people say, for example, these protest groups, like, I mean, there are some in the UK UNCUT, or even the green groups or things, they always attack capitalism.
Yeah.
But they're really attacking the wrong target, because capitalism... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
It's absolutely fine. This is an issue I feel very strongly about, actually. It's one of the things that motivated my book, and I talk about it at great length. This huge kind of movement of anger, the Occupy movement and everything else, I'm entirely in agreement with the motivation behind it, but the target is wrong. They think capitalism is bad. They think capitalism creates inequality. It doesn't. It's actually the most equal and fair system. But what they're railing against has somehow got the name capitalism. It isn't. It's, like I said, crony capitalism.
So I've made the statement, or posited, that minimum wage is for labor what interest rates are for speculators. In other words, if you, the bank is keeping rates down to artificially low rates, 1%, 0.5% here in the UK, to favor speculators, as you're pointing out. It's anti-capitalist, it's pro-speculating, it's creating bubbles, and it's creating economic duress. On the other side of the equation, you're saying less than 10% of the economy's export. Well, by increasing that export, you're talking about increasing jobs. You're talking about increasing manufacturing, which would mean you'd have to pay people something that's commensurate with the skill that they are giving into the economy to manufacture stuff to export. So that organized labor factor, you know, the trade union Congress, and these people that have been disenfranchised, these union people, that has to represent itself, but not the way that they've been representing themselves up until now. Is there a room, if you were advising TUC, which is an unlikely scenario, but if you were, would you say to them, look, don't argue that you want necessarily fairer wages. You want wages that are tied to the free money that the Bank of England is giving. Why can't the Bank of England go £3 trillion into debt to finance wages to create exports? Why are they only going into debt to finance speculation to create bubbles?
Well, that's a very good point. It would be, I think that's one of the criticisms of quantitative easing and artificially low interest rates and all the rest of it, is that the money hasn't made its way into the real economy.
Okay. I want to stick on housing. Adam Posen, who writing in the Financial Times, he said, quote, "The cult of housing is an economically disastrous one, and we've scammed the middle class into placing highly leveraged bets on a volatile asset on the premise of building equity." Okay, so we've come around back to housing, and it's a bubble, and Adam Posen in the FT, I mean, you can't argue with his sentiments.
No, I couldn't agree more. We're just so reliant on housing, and it's absolutely crazy. And the housing market in this country is insane. Let me just give you a couple of stats. There's a very good book by a gentleman called Kevin Cahill called Who Owns Britain and Ireland? And did you know, for example, that less than 8% of this country is built on? In other words, the entire population of this country live on less than 8% of the land. 70% of British land is owned by less than 1% of the population. The Crown, large institutions, aristocratic families. Almost 50% of the land in Britain is entirely unregistered. And there are 60 million acres of land in the UK. There are roughly 60 million Britons. We could have an acre of land each, but the average Briton lives on 340 square yards. 60 million people live in 24 million homes, which occupy just 7.7% of the land, 4.4 million acres. And the average density of people on one residential acre of British land is 12 to 13. So it all works out as about 0.07 acres per person. It's such a distorted it's such a distorted way of distributing the wealth. It's just incredible. This 1% own 70%.
Well, the cult of housing, people want to get in on that. In other words, Thatcher opened the floodgates and said, you too can be a homeowner, you can do a house owner. They want to get into it. They emulate the royal family. They emulate the monarchy. The royal baby popped out of the womb, and suddenly, you know, the whole world is, we want to be monarchs and aristos too. So that feeds in. The BBC is a state institution. They support this idea of the cult of housing.
It's crazy, and I mean, we have the expression, an Englishman's home is his castle. And there is this obsession with owning land. It's natural to want to own land. Everyone wants to do it. It's, it's an obvious form of wealth.
But in exchange for the 0% interest rates that allow people to get on this so-called ladder is in exchange for other policies that are highly detrimental. Foreign policies that are detrimental. Domestic work policies that are detrimental. So people are trading their civil rights. All these CCTV cameras in Britain. This is the most surveyed country in the world. You just mentioned land per citizen. Yeah. How many CCTV cameras per citizen? It's something like
I think we have more in London than anywhere else in the world, don't we?
For every 10, there's at least 1 or 2 cameras, and it's growing exponentially. So they give that up in exchange for low rates and a housing bubble that's always, without fail, crashes.
Well, one of the biggest, most economic crashes, the crash of 2008, was driven by a real estate bubble. It's real estate bubbles create more problems than they cure. The other problem we have is planning restrictions. Nobody can build anything in this country. Well, I mean, they can, it's not that simple, but it's just so onerous to try and buy land and get planning permission, despite the fact that most land isn't built on. Again, it means that everyone's trying to buy this tiny pool of land. You know, there's a tiny pool of houses, and everyone's trying